Derek McNamara of REACT Rugby is with us to reflect on the Champions Cup final defeat. Derek, you've crunched the numbers.
I have.
Yeah, it didn't go quite.
Still lost.
It didn't go quite the way the preview suggested it would.
No, it didn't. No, and I'll get into kind of like the more nitty gritty of it. I think a couple of things that I said last week, just around, injuries would have a massive impact on the game. They did. Ireland were well up before the major injury happened, which we'll get into. But look, when you boil it down to it,
you Freudian slip there with Ireland and Leinster. We'll come back to that. Yeah, Leinster were well up before.
Yeah, I'm still on an Ireland high. I think, but look, when you boil it down, okay, when we look at it from a analytical perspective, from a performance perspective, in rugby, we've kind of like got two types of sports, or two types of rugby in Ireland. We've got our international, where you've got maybe 10 to 12 meaningful games a year, where these teams, are trying to hit peak level for every single game. And I think we may have butted heads a little bit like this, against even like Italy. The coaching staff and the team themselves are trying to go out and play at peak performance every single game, even if they're playing against Italy. They're trying to change their team specifically to try and improve the game on game, week on week. But then when we got something like professional rugby, where it's more of a trying to peak for a certain type of or period of the actual year, then I think that's slightly different in that you're trying to use as many players as you can to get into the playoffs. But once you get into those playoffs, once you get into those post-season, you treat it exactly the same as you would for an international level, where you play your best team, you try and improve, you try and take small incremental gains using the best players that you have, and you learn from those games. Even if they went out and played against Munster and lost and got injuries, even if they got an injury against James Ryan at that Munster game, they would have learned from it and they would have improved as a result.
Can I just point out that I think there's a flaw in that logic, which goes back to the point where you said that the James Ryan injury is the crucial moment from a Leinster perspective.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't tally with it would have been okay if he'd got injured against Munster.
But see, we'll go into it now in a minute. We've got some graphs to show the impact of that injury during the game. Had he not played the entire week, then they would have the game plan would have changed significantly, and the people who are responsible for the different things, whether it's defensive line calls, whether it's line out calls, whether it's all these different things, they would have been talked about, organised, and actually improved.
Well, there's such a well-coached team that they know what to do whenever the replacement hooker is off, to the point where we saw Josh van der Flier thrown in the Six Nations, but actually he'd done it before for Leinster, so it wasn't a shock.
He did it at the weekend as well.
Exactly, that's my point, is that this is a team who has prepared for the eventuality that James Ryan might go off and get injured, because he gets injured sometimes. So
of course, yeah.
The point about during the week they would have prepared for that eventuality. They did prepare for that. I've no doubt that they prepared. Yeah. It's just that the pressure of the final or whatever.
Well, also,
I think you can't replace James Ryan, it turns out.
Yeah, correct. But if you could replace James Ryan had you prepared for it, and had you actually put in place a. But they couldn't actually change that. Anyway, we'll get into it a little bit more
to
detail,
go back to the point, because the team that played against Munster, the back row that ended up playing the vast majority of the game was Max Deegan, Josh van der Flier, World Player of the Year, and Jack Conan. The team was strong enough. Ronan Kelleher started at 2. Jimmy O'Brien started at fullback. Henshaw played the full game. Charlie Natai basically played the full game. Harry Byrne is supposed to be good enough, but played a bad game against Munster. I think that it's risk reward. The reward was players were fresh. The vast majority of the team were fresh, and that they had basically no injury worries heading into the final, with the exception of Sexton.
So by them
also proved.
So them putting out a kind of mismatch of team against Munster, right? The problem with that, and the main significant issue with that is that it's an overall problem for the club and the team. So the players that aren't first team players that lost all of a sudden have no way of redeeming themselves in the following week. But that's and the players that did play added more pressure onto the team because there was nothing else left.
Well, and more pressure. How can there be more pressure than
that? Was the first time they'd lost
Champions Cup final, though. At home, I do think that perhaps dealing with the pressure in the week and talking about the previous season's disappointment ended up being a psychological issue. But again, very hard to measure the analytics on that.
Is there a perfect amount of strength and depth? Like, do Leinster have too much strength and depth, if you get me?
No, because the season's a very long season. You know, you've got an 18 season game, and then you've got a 6-game season with, you know, our club cup competition with the possibility of 9 games. So the actual having the amount of depth that you need to be able to get to the final or semi-final of both of those organisations is what their strength is. But the problem is that if you're trying to reward those players, even when it gets to the key part of the season, it's about performance, it's about grit, it's about being absolutely ruthless in what you do. And you know, you could see the Rog getting that out of his team, out of his players, you know, stuff that doesn't even matter, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like going to the stadium, of course you're going to get fans flipping off the team, you know. It's that's the nature of the sport. It's a barbarian sport that is entertaining, and what we go to see is and it's.
But they use it brilliantly.
Yeah, and you know, that is probably, and like what we're talking about here, quintessentially is coaching. Okay, and the other thing that we kind of looked at as well is from an analytical perspective is we look at certain things in the game that we can kind of distinguish whether or not a team has given the right feedback at half time. So in the second half, there was quite a few HIAs, or at least possible head traumas. There was quite a lot of missed tackles, and there was obviously the 2 yellow cards. All 3 of those things together would suggest that there was much more of a go out there and put the sword to them, lads, when in reality it was probably best to be like, okay, well, we're 9 points ahead here, let's focus, let's bring it all together and let's push on. But because of these different things, it would suggest that the team talk at half time probably wasn't the right way to go ahead.
There's a chance that the players just didn't enact the team talk that was intended.
Potentially, and look, we're talking about fine margins. We're talking about the final of the Heineken Cup as well. So.
That's the thing. Like, you know, if Crowley misses the kick the previous week, or if Frawley makes the kick, or if Harry Byrne takes the kick, then they manage the team perfectly. They manage the resource perfectly. You know,
but they didn't, and this is the second time they've done it. And when you look at the difference between what O'Gara says and the amount of pressure that he takes off the team by putting himself out in front, he would have been probably the butt of quite a lot of jokes had they not gone on, had Leinster gone on to win it. But because he's able to actually take all that pressure off the team, and he's able to make the focus on himself, but be quite coherent and be quite poignant on what he's saying, he's able to bring the players and get them like absolute physical most, because the players, you know, the data would suggest that Leinster have better players. But anyway, we can go into a little bit more.
Let's get into the information.
So, like, also, like, there's this review of the final that it was probably the best final that has been. But when you watch it back in slow motion, like I do, I think it probably would suggest like it was great show, and it was a great ending. But from a performance perspective, the actual level of rugby wasn't that great. You know, the passing wasn't great, the breakdowns, the actual overall, there's quite a lot of mistakes from both sides.
I would suggest
you get at a final.
Yeah, exactly. That's pressure. That's the whole point of pressure. That's like that is. How do you measure the pressure? Because like it's the occasion is obviously, you know, if these two sides were playing for nothing in a pre-season friendly, a lot of those mistakes don't happen.
I know, but
kicks don't get sliced.
But you would have. What it would suggest is that one side was better than the other. Like, I think Leinster probably played better overall, but when we look at the data, and anyway, we can go into so to try and identify specifically what went wrong, we look at the game from start to finish, and we cut it into kind of 2 sections: first half and second half. And then we grade every player's interaction based on the accuracy or the quality or the positioning or the technique of a player's performance, whether that's the ruck, whether it's a pass, whether it's tackle, line out, lift, whatever it is. And then what we can do is we can then split that first half and second half into 3 sections. So the graph that we have here kind of shows the quality of the performance in the first half and the second half. And what we see here is that...
Which team is this, sorry?
So this is Leinster in the final, okay? So basically what we can see for people at home that are listening, basically we have a line two lines, the first line showing the first half and the second line showing the second half. And when we go on to the second slide here, we can see can see specifically where James Ryan came off injured. So Leinster were playing very, very well, and then there's a significant drop off in the quality of the performance.
The line is really high on the graph, and then James Ryan goes off, and then the line collapses.
And then if we go to the next slide, we can see the same player's performance. So we basically took the starting 15 from, I think it was like 8 or 9 games, last 8 or 9 games that all these players have been involved in, and then we do a comparison, and we can see the blue line, which is the Leinster players prior to the final, and then we can see the impact of James Ryan as he went off. And basically what it shows is that in 3 or 4 of the sections of the 6, Leinster played significantly worse than what they would have done if they were playing with James Ryan. And what does that mean, or what is the actual, like, what are the effects of that? And that's James Ryan being the leader at the line-out. That's James Ryan being the main voice in defence. It's James Ryan organising players once they're getting up off the ground. The impact that he had was, really, really, really important.
Work rate, as you say, that's involvement per player.
Yeah, so that's every player's activity. So we can look at work rate from different aspects. We can look at it as a plain simple grade, quality, or we can see it as a work rate. So we can say, okay, well, one activity is equal to another. So a pass is equal to a tackle. And then we can split it into technical, physical, mental, and tactical as well. So we can say, okay, well, if a player has a dominant tackle, we can give that player a score of a 2. If he misses, we can give him a -1. Okay, so then we can then build where these players lie, or what the actual performance output is of the team. And when James Ryan came off, everything went to pot. And there was other things that happened in the game that were not just specific to James Ryan, but the defensive shape changed quite a bit. The team became quite more passive in the defensive line as well. The kick chase was really, really, really passive. With the defensive line being passive, with O'Gara's or La Rochelle's attacking shape, they do quite a lot of around the corner. You probably would have seen. You probably don't see it on the TV, but you see it live. And what that comes from comes from touch rugby, which is massive in New Zealand, where the players try to overload one side of the ball if the ball is in midfield, and as a result causing overlaps.
Do we do a bit of that with Ireland?
We do. We do.
Yeah,
we do. Yeah, definitely.
Didn't notice any of it.
But it's more. It's just working harder off the ball. The attacking players need to work, and it's basically 3 guys go from left to right. Ruck is in the middle of the pitch, and the first guy gets it, straightens, then pass it on. If you're way too passive on that, then basically you're going to get a defensive or overlap on you. And then the second thing that was kind of significant as well was that the kick chase was very passive as well. So when we were stuck in our own half in the second half,
it was basically down to Hugo Keaton.
Boot the ball down. Bryce Doolan
or Jimmy O'Brien would be the only ones chasing.
Yeah, but what happened was Doolan was able to catch the ball, run 20 metres, then kick it, and then put pressure under the catcher.
Yeah.
And as a result, stop dead, you can't get out of your 22. It just repeats itself. So there must be some. I'd love to see the GPS data for this, because I don't think because La Rochelle plays so narrow.
Is it not fatigue from making a gazillion tackles though?
But there wasn't that many gazillion tackles.
Did we not make 288 tackles, or is there 80 tackles or something?
I can't tell you right now. Okay, I don't have that data here.
We definitely won way more tackles than...
They had 61% of the possessions. So they had...
La Rochelle had 61%.
They had 100 breakdowns, and we had 60... Or Leinster, I shouldn't say weeks. Anyway, Leinster had 63 breakdowns. La Rochelle contested 62 of those breakdowns, 62%.
Was that more than you expected?
No, it's right on point where they were during the season. So they didn't change their game plan. They didn't put Leinster on any more pressure than they did. And then Leinster competed at 50%, just under 50% of the La Rochelle breakdowns. So the other things that were kind of very, very strange was just uncontested lineouts. So I think Leinster, so of the 15 lineouts that Rochelle had, Leinster only contested 2 of them at the end of the game. And
they got a penalty on one of them.
No, they got a penalty off a maul, which was very unusual. So, not that I want to pick on or go about the referee, because look, I heard, listened to the 42 there yesterday, just about talking about the referee and how disgusting it is going after the referee during and after the game. And I completely agree. I completely 100% agree. But there needs to be more done by the officiating. There just needs to be more. Like, there was a couple of very, very unusual calls. I think that one of the bigger ones was around the catch of Jimmy O'Brien in the, what was it, 64th minute. I know, Jimmy O'Brien. And then, there was a maul against La Rochelle, which was on the 64th minute, where the maul was moving forward and the defensive Leinster player was bound onto it, but the referee called a penalty against La Rochelle for offside.
Yeah.
There was like 3 or 4 of these that, these things happen all the time in the game. For the referee to call it at that point was very unusual.
The only thing you'd say about Piper at the weekend was that it seemed to balance out. Like, James Tracy seemed fairly okay with the refereeing.
I thought he had a great game, especially at the breakdown. There could have been a couple of more penalties in the game, and the turnover. There was kind of 2 major incidents that I saw in the game, and they were at 66 minutes. Leinster losing their control, or getting a little bit too passive when there was a scrum, and they didn't go for route 1 in the scrum, and so they just put the ball in, and Alatoa was turned, the ball spilled out the side and got a turnover. The other significant one was Ringrose in 76 minutes, just before the Alatoa red card. He comes onto the ball too quickly, and as a result, he should have passed. He had three guys outside him, and that would have been a man-on-man against the La Rochelle defenders. It would have been a perfect man-on-man situation. But those 2 instances, and there's literally tens of thousands of things that happen in the game that we measure, but had either of those 2 things changed, or had just a little bit more concentration, or a little bit more as a team defined decision making, then I think that the actual result probably would have been a little bit different.
How did Harry Byrne do? Sorry, not Harry Byrne, Ross Byrne.
Not great. So we have one last graphical representation, which is, so this basically, when we take all the grades from all the players, we then aggregate them from front row, second row, back row, half back, centre and back 3. And what you'll see for the people at home, the blue line represents all the players in the 7 or 8 games that we've analysed before, and the yellow line indicates the players that started for the final. And what you'll see is the front row and the second row had a brilliant game. Like, James Ryan was having probably the best game of his career. He was absolute man possessed, and the back row are identical, but the problems lie and the issues are around the half-back, centre and back 3. They just did not perform, unfortunately, and that's down to the defensive play of La Rochelle as well. You got to take into account that La Rochelle, amazing game,
back-to-back European champions here.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant game plan,
going to be spoken about in the future as all-time greats.
But see, so Leinster play a very, very flat game plan. And when you get a defensive strategy that blitzes that defensive game plan, and the player isn't able to make the decision, then it stops everything outside them from actually happening, the thing that they happen. And this is what happened. This is what happened throughout the entire game. Basically, at the start of the half, obviously, the tries were scored. They came off 9, and they came off a line-out. I think there's only 1 that came off the back line. So there needs to be the ability more within the sport to change the actual game plan that you implemented And that's where we come in. That's where React Rugby is trying to improve and help and enhance the ability of the coaches to make better decisions throughout the game and get more informed decision making onto the players so that the coaches can have a bigger impact on the game.
Is this a concern for Ireland? That so Adrian was saying he was watching the New Zealand coverage. Mills Mullane and John Kerwin were like, well, this is a good template for everybody now watching Ireland. I'm just like, it's basically Ireland. So
yeah, it was the last chance that any team had to figure it out, and they were figured out. But had we played our first team against Munster,
I don't think that matters.
Yeah.
I really don't think that matters.
It does. I guarantee it does.
But if say 5 of them get injured, right? Mm-hmm. How are you then suddenly going, oh great, we have a bunch of players who haven't played for the first team all season playing in this game? It's like it's when they were running in their first 3 tries, were you like, well, this team looks undercooked?
No, but again, you okay, the worst things, as I was going to Lou and I heard James Ryan come off, and I heard it, I was like, oh no, like that, we couldn't have got a worse injury, and it was such a like, it wasn't even it was an offload from a tackle, and he fell on the ground and somebody ran past him. It wasn't malicious.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad. It was just bad timing, bad situation.
Yeah.
But I you know, what are the chances of O'Gara going to New Zealand as a consultant or one of these things?
Go to the World Cup for Ireland?
Yeah, no, against Ireland.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, then we'd be grand. We'd be grand here.
Well, we should just pay him to be our consultant.
Yeah.
But what if Ross Byrne makes the kicks? Like, do you know what I mean? Then all of this is moot, and it's a great gritty performance. And
my auntie had balls, should be uncle.
Yeah, but true, but then that's the same point about picking a different team last week.
I know, but we don't know
exactly. But we do know that if we made the kicks, they would have won by a point.
If you look at any sport, okay, you look at any sport. You look at soccer. You look at NFL. You look at volleyball, tiddlywinks. You play your best players, no matter what.
You don't.
It's more important.
Mayo had 5 weeks off and beat Kerry, the All Ireland champions, who played their best players the 3 previous weeks against inferior opposition, and it didn't matter.
But it's not. It's. That's okay if it's mid-season. That's okay if you've already made the playoffs. But if it's worth significant financial impact on your team, if it's worth a trophy at the 2 games, if you have 2 games left and you have maximum 3, you play your best players, no matter what.
The players they played were good enough to beat Munster. But then
they weren't. They didn't. They lost.
They were good enough to beat Munster, but they just didn't execute. They played badly, and they They couldn't get the restart right.
Yeah.
That's not coaching. That's like brain fart from 2 players brain farting at the very end. Oh, you're ahead of me. I shouldn't take this off. Oh, I shouldn't be ahead of you.
No, but see, that is. But then again, that is. So Harry and Ross have different kickoff techniques. So that is.
They've all played all season. Like,
no, they haven't.
Ryan Baird has played with Harry Byrne loads all season. There's no reason for him to run past it. There's no
absolutely.
reason.
But the problem with that is that if you're chasing the game and you're playing with a bunch of players that you haven't played with all season.
But that team have played loads together.
No, they haven't. That 15 that started probably never played together.
But loads of the combinations had.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so with the exception of the first team, which plays
had
in all the big games. Had you
played your Irish team, the team that had played in the Six Nations together, had played against Toulouse the week for. Like, it's good debate.
Yeah, I disagree with you, but that's all right.
That's all right. Yeah, we're still friends.
Derek, good stuff. More at React Rugby. What's your Twitter handle?
Derek at React Rugby, I think. Derek Mack at React. But LinkedIn is the place to find.
Okay,